Yiannah. Welcome to On Spirit Talks. It's so good to have you here.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be such a blast for sure.
I'm so excited. I loved being on your podcast. It
Yes.
was amazing to finally meet you and talk with you. So I'm excited to dive into your story this time and yeah, see what comes up. So if you
Thank
could
you.
tell us a little bit about your journey and how you started your path to become a soul contract and divine healing practitioner.
Yes. So I guess like when I look back, there was always this spiritual component to me in my life. But my mother was the only spiritual person that I grew up with. And she'd have angels all over the house and she would read all these books and she always wanted to share it with people. And the only one who ever cared to listen was me. So I love just like taking it all in. And then like eventually like I would read those books like as a teenager. But that was really like my only spiritual connection, right? There's that whole like Greek Orthodox, you go to church and like the whole religion aspect. But outside of that, I didn't have anything else. And then as I got into my 20s, I just started feeling and shifting differently. I can't explain it. It's just, you know how it is, like when all of a sudden you're like, I want different things and I want to know and like be a part of different things. And then I will say at the age of 27, I had like the biggest heartbreak of my life to the point where it completely like destroyed me. Like it made me a shell of a person in that very moment, of whatever happened and transpired. And what I realized was that as it completely shattered me, I started to rebuild myself in such a different way. I learned unconditional love for this person who had turned my life upside down. Okay. And I remember going, well, that's odd. I really should be mad and pissed and angry and sad. But it was just nothing but unconditional love. And I started realizing the way I thought was different and the way I moved in life was different. And I just started wanting to be more in my truth, my authenticity. And from then, I just started doing my own like research and I dove deep. And there's a spiritual church that I connect with that I quote unquote religiously go to. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it really opened me up. And I think what happens is when you start finding like-minded people in that community, it really just helps you open you up in a beautiful way. So then this was a few years ago. I'm watching some podcasts on YouTube and there was a soul contract practitioner on there. And the second she came on screen and she started like, she put up a soul contract chart and she's explaining it, I was like, don't know why, but I was like, I need to know everything about what this woman is talking about. I bought the book. I think a few months later, I started doing the training. And it's like ever since, all I can do is like see numbers and frequencies when people talk to me. And like as I was telling the story about that complete heartbreak at 27, I keep thinking 11 too. It's a lot of that death and rebirth energy. And that is what I went through, right? So as I really stepped into that, what happened was it led me out of my 5D business and it led me out of my 3D business and into this 5D, like soul contracts and everything about spirit and all that. And now it's like all day long, everything I do is consumed with that God aspect, right? And not in a religious sense. We know this, right? There's a huge difference in like this ever knowing God presence in your life where you're like, I know I'm always protected. Source is always with me. I'm always like divinely aligned. Like I just like you just feel that energy. I mean, I know you know.
I know. So I grew up Catholic. So I totally get where kind of you came from. And as I kind of pulled away from that as I got older, I don't associate myself with the Catholic Church, but I still do pray. I still connect with spirit in my own ways. And I feel like I tell people this all the time that spirituality does not have to be associated with an organized religion because I feel like that prevents so many people from actually like stepping into this aspect of spirit and connecting with spirit because of past issues they had or whatever came up in their upbringing. So I feel like I love that distinction between the two.
Oh yeah. I will say that it actually I have chills everywhere right now. It like freed me from feeling like I have to show up a certain way, I have to believe a certain way, I have to do things a certain way. And I remember one time I was actually, and this is not to put down religion or anything, like the fact that like if you just have belief in something higher than you, I think is beautiful. Okay. But I remember being in the Greek church one time and I've heard this many times in the church, and they're like, you know, if you don't come to church, God's not going to know you the day you take your last breath. And I remember thinking to myself, even as a kid, that's bullshit. That's not, God is with me 24/7 in my home, at the forest preserve, like at work, like everywhere. I don't need to be in this one specific space to be able to connect. And then people who are so richly spiritual, I'm sorry, richly religious, they almost look at you like you're like blasphemy, right? Like, what are you doing? Like, how can you not believe? And I'm like, I believe in the same thing you believe in. I just have no restrictions on what that looks like. And the freedom of that is like life changing.
Huge. I agree 100%. And I love how you talked about your heartbreak and that kind of being what kind of pushed you forward, because I feel like I've been through that as well, and it really shatters what you thought, what you wanted, like hopes for the future, and it kind of makes you really focus on yourself, and
Right?
which is so hard sometimes. It's easier not to focus on yourself, but I
Well,
do
you know,
love
but you know
how
why? You know why?
why?
That's because we both shared that magical eight that I was nine to find in your chart. And those eights and soul contracts, they put everyone else before them. So it's hard for you to prioritize yourself or to do for you before you do for others. But once you step into that, right? Once you're just like, I need to up level my self worth, I need to set healthy boundaries. It's not about ego or about putting somebody else down, but it's about like loving and respecting yourself enough that the people in your life who also love you, they will absolutely respect those boundaries. Right. And that's how you start to like differentiate like who's really here for me and who's not. Right. So when you step into that power, that in itself is life changing.
That's true, yeah, and I always say too, the people who don't respect your boundaries are the ones who need them, and the ones that you need to start setting
Totally.
more or stronger ones with. But I want to talk about the numbers because I know you're always talking about those numbers and you know
Yes.
exactly what they mean. But for anyone who doesn't know about soul contracts, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So essentially, soul contracts are, I have the loudest ringing in my ear right now. I almost can't focus. Oh, my name. Whoa. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Soul contracts, I apologize.
It's
Soul
okay.
contracts, basically what it is it's uh your birth name that was given to you at birth really carries sound frequencies. And when using Hebrew numerology, we're able to translate each letter of your birth name into these beautiful sound frequencies that then create your soul's plan. And what it will show us is the karma, the challenges that you came in with, what your soul wanted to experience in this incarnation. It will show us your talents and your gifts. You know, what are you innately really good at? Where do you shine? It will show us your goals. Like, what does your soul want to accomplish? And then that soul destiny. What is that overall purpose that your soul wanted to pursue and explore in this lifetime? So when we look all that together, we're able to really see like where are you stuck in life and where do you shine, and are you like aligned to your path, right? And then we have these we live in these 7-year cycles. So typically in that fifth year cycle, which is 35 to 42 years old, that's when most people have like their spiritual awakening or their dark night of the soul, which is really how it comes in, right? Just like my heartbreak, huge dark night of the soul. And what it does is the soul is really asking you to get aligned and awaken to your connection to source, who you are as a soul. And it's almost like in that time you change jobs and you move countries and you get married, you get divorced, you have kids, all these major life changes. And it's like you really start to evaluate, what do I want out of this life? you know, and what is my purpose and what can I do to connect more with source? And so you get a lot of people in between that age range who experience that. And as tough it may seem to go through it, it is such a beautiful blessing because it just realigns you and it opens you up to what else there is. So your soul contract will show us all of that plus so much more. It's just insane how accurate it is. I mean, we talked about you, right? Your soul destiny was at 14.5. That 14.5 is very intense. It's this uh, intense energy, intense relationships. It's like this deep thinker. It's very reflective. Who am I in this world? And what happened? What did I learn in all these experiences and reflections in my life? And you're here to write about it because yours was in a soul destiny. So here's Lauren telling you, oh yeah, 14.5 soul destiny girlfriend, you're going to write this book, and you had written your book, right? And that's not to say that, okay, your soul destiny is accomplished. Clearly there's way more to that. But when you see stuff like that, you're like, wow, it it's just mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, I feel like that's so interesting. And it's funny because I don't know how you memorize all of these numbers. I want to know how many numbers potentially are there? How many different variations?
Well, there are 22 individual numbers, right? So there's your chart could have any one to number 1 to 22, but the way the combination of the numbers are on your chart also adds a whole nother element, right? So it's not just because you have a 14 or you have a 5. Well, how do those interact with all the other 6 placements in your chart? So it's very much like people who read astrology, right? Astrology is a huge component in soul contracts. And I actually thought about this yesterday. I was having this moment where I was like, I'm going to be grateful right now because there was a time when I would look at these frequencies and I'd be like, God, I can't wait for the day where I just look at a number or a combination of numbers and I just go and I know it. And now like I feel like I'm at that place. So I gave myself this gratitude because I was like, man, it was a journey and it feels so good when you can finally get there, you know?
And it's
But yeah,
probably
it's
because you're living it. Like, I
right.
feel like you mentioned you're always thinking about numbers, and when something happens, you try to find that like correlation. So, all of that practice and fascinating.
Well, totally. And it's also that aspect of that age frequency where it's like when I hear people talk about something, I'm like, oh, I feel like I have this solution or something that could help you overcome it or not have to like face the difficulty of it or break through. And all I want to do is just share, share, share. I just want to like tell people. So obviously I have to do it in the right context, right? You can't just offer unsolicited advice, which this eight always wants to do. So it's about me establishing boundaries with other people as well, right? But it's like people talk to me and I just hear these frequencies and I'm just like, oh, I've got a solution for that. Can I please, please, can your soul please say something so I can share it with you?
And I'm kind of similar in terms of when people are talking about symptoms or whatever they're going through, I'm turning it in with my expertise and my Reiki brain and all of these things like, oh, what's the metaphysical component of that? But yeah, like you said, you
Totally.
have to kind of rein it in and wait for people to be ready. So, in terms of healing, I know you are a divine healing practitioner.
Yes.
What is that?
Okay. So I first did soul contracts and then I went into divine healing. And what divine healing is essentially the basis is we know no one else can heal you. Only you can heal yourself. You have to want to heal, and that's how that healing takes place. But as a divine healing practitioner, what I do is basically I get together, my higher self and your higher self come together and hang out. And we're like, okay, what needs to be cleared? What limiting beliefs live within us, right? Things that we're not sometimes not even conscious of. What hold us back? What sabotaging behaviors exist that prevent us from living our most authentic, most abundant life? And so through a divine healing session, I get it intuitively guided to hit a certain topic and then we break it down. Why does this come up? How does it show up in your life? Where do you feel it in your body? And the more you can connect with that, the more you feel it and you sit with that feeling. Because we know in order for you to heal something, you have to feel it. You can't just avoid it and think it's going to go away, because eventually it's going to come back and it could absolutely blow up your life.
Mhm.
So as we guide through all of these different blocks and sabotaging behaviors, we're able to clear them. And we don't just clear them, but then we put in like these, we restructure these positive belief systems, right? If one of your things is you just have low self-worth, which is very common, then let's create an I am statement after we do our beautiful healing. And what is the I am statement that most aligns with you being so worthy that you can have and you do have everything you want in your life? So it's about restructuring these positive beliefs and like letting them enter like your aura, right? Your field, like your body, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of that. And then you start to see the shifts in your life. It is such a beautiful practice. And it's one of those where, unless you really experience it yourself, it's really hard to really imagine the magnitude of what it feels like to receive that healing.
Yeah, I feel like embodying the healing and that self-worth and just all of the energetics behind it is huge. What is the main theme that typically shows up with people? Is there a main theme?
There actually are three that I see often. Almost every single reading, I'll get either one or multiple of these. The first one is always that self-worth we just talked about. I think we live in a society that, I don't want to say suppresses self-worth, but there's no you're not like built up to really sit in your self-worth, right? You wake up and you go to your work and you do your thing, you get your paycheck, you go to sleep and rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And it's like, well, some people are stuck in these patterns where they're like, I'll never get out of this and I'll never be able to have what I want. But it's like, but why? Who told you that you weren't worthy enough to achieve the thing that you want to achieve? Who told you that you couldn't wake up every day and do the thing that you love? And it's like a lot of that is internally as we grow up, right? As children, like we all have something that limits us, some limiting belief or sabotaging behavior that keeps us from being like at our fullest potential at some points in our lives. So that self-worth is something I see very much. It's very much associated to that 3, the 4, and the 8 frequency in soul contracts. So when I see that right away, I'm like, self-worth, let's talk about it. Let's build it up. Because when you feel worthy, you can be worthy and you can have everything you're worthy of. It really is that simple, right? The second theme that I see a lot too is disempowerment. And disempowerment doesn't just come from other people, like an external source where someone may have hurt you or made you feel small, but we also disempower ourselves. Back to I'm not smart enough and I'm not this and I'm not that, so I can't do. And my circumstances, aren't of somebody who can achieve things. And it's like, again, where did you learn that? And let's clear it. Because when you step into your power, there is nothing that you can't achieve. Again, in all aspects, mentally, physically, spiritually, like all of that, there's nothing you can't have. And I would say the third theme that always shows up is this feeling of being alone.
Mm.
Now, I don't think we talked about that when you were on my podcast, but did you feel that growing up? You felt alone, you felt different. You just felt kind of like, even with amongst friends and family, you just felt alone.
I think when I was younger, I didn't necessarily feel alone because I had like a big family and friends that we always were in the same grade together. But I ended up moving schools in the sixth grade. And so at that point is probably when I kind of, you know, started withdrawing or being a little bit more shy because I was kind of taken away from the people I knew for so many years. And coming from a Catholic school that had like 12 kids in each grade, and it was always the same kids, to a public school that had several different classrooms, it was a huge, huge shift.
Mm,
So yeah, that might have been when things, I might have felt a little bit alone.
right.
I do love my alone time. I feel like I need that and I
Totally.
crave that. So I don't know if that has something to do with it
No, here's
too,
what I'll
but
say. So that alone theme, that factor is very much one of those where it's like even within society, even within family, you just feel different. You feel like maybe you're not completely understood, or I don't want to say appreciated, but it's this feeling of I'm almost not even heard. I'm just different and I feel alone, not lonely, but alone. And what happens is the more you step into who you are and love yourself and accept every part of you, all of a sudden you're like, oh, I really don't care if somebody thinks I'm different. Like, I know I'm fantastic the way I am. And there's going to be somebody out there, my tribe will find me, where you're going to have that moment one day where you're like, I feel at home. I feel like I have found my people. I have found my place in society. And it feels so good. And then what happens is that alone feeling of alone then goes to, I really enjoy my alone
yeah,
time.
that's me.
It helps me like recuperate, and I could just be like peaceful, and I could just think about what I want, and it almost like fills your cup back up. Totally. Like I get that so much. For me to be able to sit down with like a puzzle for like 5 hours and there's like not a single soul that's bothering me, and I could just listen to music or put on a podcast is like my greatest joy. And I
That's
love my
me.
daughter. I love, I have a beautiful little girl and she is just everything to me. But that alone, like I get it. It fills your cup and you need it every so often. So you can like what is it, like realign or just like be so centered and feel so good. So those are the general themes that I feel like always come up the most. And they're huge, and it's not that easy to just wake up and be like, today I am worthy. No, you have to work at it every day, but eventually what happens is you start to see how your work pays off, right? And that's the reward because now you're living this beautiful life.
Yeah, I think even when I'm working with my clients, I agree with you. I think it's the self-worth piece is huge. The disempowerment piece again is huge. And also that self-confidence piece, like that believing in yourself enough to move forward and do it. So yeah, so interesting how these are common themes
Mm-hmm.
throughout so many
Oh yeah.
healers and coaches and all of that.
Oh yeah.
What are some things that people can do at home to work on overcoming some of these blocks?
One of the things that I'm somebody who likes to share ideas and strategies that have worked for myself, right? So if I have an experience in myself, I don't always know what the outcome is. So I always share what I know. And what I know is if you actually work on catching those negative thoughts and becoming aware, right? That awareness is everything. So the moment you're like, oh God, this is going to be a terrible day, you immediately cancel that and you go, nope, today's going to be a beautiful day. Whatever conflict I may be in right now, whatever problem needs to get solved, it will. It's going to be the most beautiful day there is. So it's about catching those negative thoughts, that negative thinking, and replacing it with something positive, whether you believe it or not. Because when you say it to yourself enough times, your brain now starts to calculate that as your reality. Right? We know that, right? That's been proven over and over. So it's like once you use that awareness to now start catching those thoughts, that will shift your day in such beautiful, huge ways that it's like you no longer have to be sad, miserable, angry, frustrated, any of that. You can quickly go, okay, this fire went off. Okay, you know what? It is what it is. The fire has already started. Now, how do I work on putting out the fire? Right. And it's like this way where you don't have to feel, it doesn't have to devastate your day or the moment. Just let it pass and then think of that positive thing. And I think that's such a huge thing that will just make enormous shifts in your life.
That tip is amazing. And I do that myself, but it wasn't something I always did because with that negative thinking, at least for me, and I know a lot of other people, we're not even aware of how many negative thoughts we're having about ourselves and our environment and our life
All
because
day.
it's so, yes, it just goes through our mind subconsciously. We're not even aware of it. But then once I find once you start trying to notice them is when you might be like, "Oh, wow. Yeah, that was kinda negative," or, "Let me just rephrase that and do the opposite." And again, when like you talked about saying the opposite, when I do that to myself, when I first started, I was like, "I feel like such a fake." Like, I
Right,
don't feel
totally.
yeah, it feels so awkward, and it's like, "Okay, this isn't believable." But it's like you do it anyway, you say it anyway, and like you said, over time, even if you don't fully believe it, it does start to shift your energy so that your that vibration does increase, and so over time, it feels lighter. And then over time, you start noticing more of those negative thoughts. So it just kind of snowballs into this like beautiful, positive habit. So I love that you shared that tip.
Yes. Awareness is everything. I mean, everything. It will absolutely shift and change your life in very wonderful ways. So, like, and the thing is, like you said, at first, it's hard to do. Like a million thoughts, negative thoughts will skip your brain before you finally catch one. And that's okay because then eventually that gap gets smaller. And now you're able to catch most, if not all of those negative thoughts. And you're like, nope, not today,
Uh,
not today. And you rephrase it and you restructure it. So it's such a huge, huge thing to be able to tap into.
I want to know what is one of the biggest life lessons that changed your view of yourself?
That's a great question. And it's funny because I've thought about this recently, and I think what it is for me is being authentic, like stepping into my authenticity and being able to speak my truth without fear of persecution or somebody thinking I'm weird or crazy. And what happened was when I started showing up authentically, because growing up like spiritually minded, and even in my 20s and my 30s, what happened was people judge that spirituality, right? So I would go to like my spiritual church or whatever, and I'd leave wherever I was, and people would be like, "Where are you going?" And I'm like, "Oh, I have an appointment," or "I'm gonna meet up with a friend." I couldn't tell people, "Yeah, I'm gonna go spend the next like 4 hours at some spiritual service where we talk about God in this beautiful way," and and I'm around like-minded people. And then I remember one day going, that's BS. I am no longer going to hide that. And then I'd get up and I'd go, I'm going to my church. I'll see you later. And it felt so good because that for me was like that tipping point where I started to go, okay, I can show up authentically. I can be my most true, my most honest self. And I don't even give a shit what other people think because I'm not hurting anybody. I'm just living my life. And this is where I want to be. And what happened was, as I started to do that, everything in life shifted. Some of the things were scary, right? Because as you step into your authenticity, some people can't handle it. Because stepping into authenticity means you've also healed a lot of your stuff. Okay. And then when you heal and somebody sees you, well, now you're triggering them because now you're either encouraging them to also be like, oh, wow, I see the growth in her. I really want to put that within myself too. Or you're triggering the fact where they're not growing and they're not healing. And now you're different. You've changed. What's going on with you? And you're like, I'm over here living my best life. So, it's one of those where I think authenticity absolutely changed my life in the most beautiful way.
That
Yeah.
is beautiful and amazing. And when you were talking, just at the end, I got chills myself when
Mm.
you're talking about stepping into that authenticity. And you're 100% right that some people won't like you speaking up for yourself or fully embracing yourself and showing that off to the world. But I learned it and it was like really uncomfortable. I try to appease people and shrink myself, but then you're just shrinking yourself and it doesn't do you any good. And then once you start, again, it's always super uncomfortable. But the more you do it, like you get to that point, just like you said, where you're like, I don't care. I'm doing this. It's what I love. It's who I am. So that is
Yeah. And
beautiful.
as a parent, right? When you shrink yourself, when you don't live in your authenticity, when you are self sacrificing for others, what are you teaching your children? To do the same exact thing. And like, I'm very conscious of that with my daughter. I'm like, I don't need her to pick up any behaviors where I have been stuck in life. I need to show her a different example, a positive example. And so that is so huge and such a huge motivating factor for me, you know?
Yes. Yeah, it makes sense because even for myself with my daughter, like being her mom is showing me what I need to work on and what I don't want her to see and what I want her to gain more confidence in. So it really does give me a whole different perspective. I feel like as a mom, you're like, well, would you say this to your daughter or would you want her to feel like that? And you're like, okay, so why am I doing that? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, I want to throw in really quickly. So, soul
Yeah.
contracts can also be used to look at like relationships within a family, right? So, we could put up your chart with your daughters and see where do you guys complement each other? Is there a struggle somewhere, a challenge, and how to better fix it, right? But what's really interesting is I have found that children, their soul contracts usually reflects that they come in with like whatever your challenges are will show up in your child's chart because they're here to clear up whatever you're still stuck in. And so I remember when I finally connected those dots, my daughter has the karma, the challenges that me and her dad have. So I
Wow.
was like, oh my God, if this is not a bigger testament that I really need to get my shit together and work through everything, like that's what I need to do. So it's such a huge driving factor and such a beautiful thing to look at because children nowadays, they don't want to have to deal with all the tough challenges that we did. They want to grow faster, they want to evolve faster, and they want to become spiritually aligned quicker. That's like what we're seeing through this soul contract work. So now I'm like, great, I'm going to deal with my stuff now. So my daughter can get to her spirituality, her evolution, all of that quicker than I did. So anyway, I wanted to share that because it's such a beautiful factor of soul contracts.
I love that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I have another question. How did you start? I know you started with the church and connecting with spirit in that way and your higher self. Is there one way for people to start connecting and developing a deeper connection with their higher self at home?
You know, one of the fun things that I actually started doing was so it's basically practicing discernment, right? Discernment is like everything, but you got to have fun. Spirit wants to have fun too. So for me, it was very much like I would throw out a question to the universe and I'd say, if the answer yes or no, right? So if the answer is yes, I want to say blue balloon today. And if the answer is no, I want to see like a purple frog, right? Just to like work on that discernment and build your connection to spirit. And then, of course, I would be out somewhere and I would see this, right? Where are you going to find a purple frog? But then I see this purple frog like on a logo somewhere or like on this huge truck that's passing me by on the road. And I'd always be like, thank you so much, spirit, because that to me was validation. And it would always be questions where I knew there was a concrete answer coming up. Am I going to X, Y, and Z this week? Right. And so playing and having a playful relationship with spirit that way really helps build that connection and helps build your discernment. And that is just such a beautiful way to come into it because it's fun, it's light, and it's not so serious.
So I
Yeah.
don't know if you noticed, but when when you said spirit likes to have fun, the lights flickered.
Oh, I love
It was
that.
so funny. And I love how you gave that tip of the yes, no. So for me, when I, talk with my clients or people who are just starting out, I say the same thing about connect with spirit in your own way or look for these signs. But I love how you gave that tip of asking either one. Like, I want to see one or the other. And then you find that sign later on. That's really cool.
Yeah, because our human mind wants to find the answer in anything because we want a specific answer. But when you ask for something physical where it's undeniable, that purple frog will be undeniable. Then you're like, yes, this is a solid answer. And then that's how you start working with it. And it's just fun. Have fun. Life's not supposed to be so serious. Enjoy yourself. And I think when you step into that energy, it really just amplifies everything else.
So I'm gonna be asking for a purple frog tomorrow.
Yes. Well, first you gotta ask your question.
Ask my question. Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you always include in your daily routine to help keep you grounded and balanced that might help other people do the same thing?
I love that. I think the best thing to do, at least for me, is waking up with gratitude. Every day I wake up, and even if I'm exhausted or not, I say, today's a good day. I have so much energy. It's going to be, fun and exciting and just filled with everything that I love. And because there's even moments throughout the day that will just bring you down, something will go wrong. And it's about coming back to that gratitude. Nope, I woke up today. I have a beautiful daughter. I have a roof over my head. I am always provided for. So stepping into that gratitude in every situation, you can find a piece of gratitude really helps shift your mindset and your energy, right? Because it just brings you to a place of peace and love. And that is something that there's not a single morning that I wake up and don't include that. And it
That's
has
beautiful.
absolutely, yeah, it has like shifted so many things for me in my life.
I think gratitude a lot of times is really underrated. Yeah.
Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking after I stopped speaking. And you just said it. Beautiful validation, right, from spirit. That is so true. People think they don't value it. They just think, okay, whatever. But your words and your thoughts define your reality. Your words and your thoughts define your reality. So why in the world would your words and thoughts not be filled with that gratitude to show you a beautiful reality? But yes, totally. People really need to, I almost want to say, awaken to the power of that because it will shift your life.
It does. Starts your morning on a good foot.
Yep.
Do you have a favorite story regarding your own connection to spirit?
Yeah, it's very similar to that purple frog, right?
Mm,
So I'll say this. So, in my early 30s, I was corporate world. I was creative director of a trade show company, and it didn't fulfill me. Money was great, my job was great. It just wasn't my thing. And so I loved children. From the day I was born, I was praying to God for a child. Okay. I mean, I remember being like 8 years old asking for one. And so I thought, I'm going to get my certification. I'm going to open up a daycare center, which was completely different than like what I was doing. And I got the certification, but it's one of those where you're like, oh, I'm scared to like those eights, they have this I'm sorry, my sixth frequency in my karma, in my soul contract karma has this failure syndrome. If I don't have guaranteed success, I'm probably not going to try it, right? I've gotten over that now, but that's what the place I was in. And I remember consciously being like, do I do this? Like, what should I do? And everywhere I went for like a week straight, I would see like on the expressway, I'd see one of those big billboards and it would say, just do it, like the Nike sign.
yeah.
Or I would get these signs that were undeniably like, that's what you need to do. Just go, just start off. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's a huge investment. And I'm leaving this job where I get a guaranteed paycheck every week and I'm starting with nothing. And literally, it was one of those where it was like, I'm going to give myself a month of quitting my job and trying to get now families to sign up with me. And sure enough, it was one of those where it led me, and 7 years later, I was maxed out with children. It was just a beautiful blessing until at that 7 year mark. Remember that 7 year cycle. So that's 7 years, like that finality, like you're closing things up. I started waking up going, I don't want to do this anymore. And I was like, well, that's crazy. Because the goal was expansion, expansion, expansion. And I sat with it because I'm a little bit impulsive. I sat with that feeling for about a month and every day didn't go away. And my gut was like, you are so done, lady. Just do it. Just be done. And finally, it was June 16th. So from January to June, it was finally like I was done. And I had no idea where I was going or what my next step was, but I knew I had faith and I knew I would be directed to the next thing. And all of a sudden, I started noticing every single door closing in front of me. And I was like, okay, I could very easily run to fear but I won't because God has always provided for me. So I'm just going to keep trusting. And it led me to here. So it is one of those things, having that faith and trusting your gut intuition. How do you feel? How does it feel in your body? Will absolutely guide you in the most beautiful, magical way. So for me, it is very much stepping into that faith and just trusting that the universe will always provide for you. Because I always tell people, haven't you always been provided for? And the answer is always yes. So that for me is just like everything.
That is a beautiful story.
Thank you.
I love that. And I know you gave so many final tips just now, but is there one final piece of advice you have for anyone in trying to improve their spiritual well-being?
You know what? I do want to say this, and it's very basic and simple. But when people start walking their spiritual path and they're trying to be like their best version of themselves, you're going to have days where you're going to fail. I mean, even me being on my path for a while, I have days and moments where I'm like, I really could have handled that better. Okay. And people around you who now see you walking that path, when you have that terrible moment, or when you just have a moment where you kind of lose your shit, they'll be like, oh, I thought spiritual people are supposed to be wise and peaceful and nothing bothers them. And what I want to say to people is, just because you're spiritual doesn't mean that you can't have a moment where you just need to like blow off steam, or a moment where you make a mistake. Everybody makes mistake. Everybody has their things that they have to learn and go through. So give yourself that grace, because I think grace is also very underrated. Give yourself that grace. Okay, you know what? I failed today. I had a moment where I just really lost it and I was not my most spiritual self. That's okay. This moment is a new moment. Tomorrow is a new day. And I can just start over again. That's it. It's a practice. Practice means you're still working through it. You're learning how to step into that energy. So giving yourself the grace and knowing that it's okay to make a mistake, I think is huge. And it's such a just fundamental, very simple thing, but we need it. We all need to give ourselves grace.
Yeah, we're human. We all make mistakes. We all need to learn. Yeah, it's definitely hard, especially if you're that type of person who gets down on themselves and so hard on themselves. But you're right. Like, I feel like we all are entitled to have those little blow ups or those emotions. And it's just part of life. And it's something that we have to navigate and learn and continue to move and grow.
Yeah. And you can't let other people bring you down because they're going to try. Consciously or unconsciously, they're going to try.
You saw
Lights?
the light?
Yeah. I didn't see it, but your hand went up. So I'm like, see, more confirmation. Those are the things you want to pay attention to. I love that you are like, you are, because you're connected, you're able to connect those dots. If you were to say to somebody who's not walking the path,
Oh, they
oh,
think I'm
you said this
nuts.
thing and the light flickered, they'll be like, okay, what else is going on? Because they don't even want to engage into that conversation. They're just like, you're crazy.
100%.
That is so funny. I love it.
So, where can our listeners learn more about you?
Okay, so you can find out all about soul contracts and myself, divine healing, everything on my website, highersoulcontracts.com. There's also access to my YouTube channel there, and all my social media on Instagram and TikTok is also Higher Soul Contracts.
So, the last thing I want to do before we go is I am pulling a card for everyone who is joining the podcast for our spirit segment. So, I pulled your card before we started, and you got Mother of Cups, which
Okay, I
is
don't know what it
that.
means, but it
So,
looks beautiful.
I'm gonna explain. So it's that beautiful, compassionate, nurturing queen who is in tune with her intuition, loves helping and listening to people and guiding people. So with everything that you talked about today, I feel like it just embodies who you are. You're a mother. You are so amazing and so kind and so nurturing. So I thought that was perfect.
I love that. Okay, hold on. You got to keep holding that up.
Yeah.
Okay. You see her little yoni down there?
Yes.
What's interesting is I actually have a new podcast coming out. It's called Your Soul Wisdom. And part of my logo and a lot of like what it has to, it's a spiritual podcast, right? A lot of what it has to do is that creation comes from the womb. And actually my logo is this beautiful yoni. Okay, I try to hide it as much as possible, right? So people really have to pay attention to really know. But the fact that you're pulling that card right now and it's showing me that is, again, a sign, validation for me, how perfectly aligned that is, because I truly believe that all of our creation comes from that space, that womb. Everything. We are filled up with creation. Again, we know that, right? That's how we create life. And every single thing, when we use the practice and we add that into like our everyday and really start to understand like the symbolism of that, it will change your life. So thank you so much for that card. It is so divinely timed and just perfect. Thank you, Spirit. Thank you, Stephanie. It was
That is so
amazing.
cool. I love that. Oh, amazing. I love
Yes,
it.
yes,
So for everyone listening, that's your cue. Get in touch with your intuition.
yes.
Nurture yourself, nurture other people. But it was such a pleasure, Yiannah, to have you on. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, and to many more, girlfriend.